Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Book Talks with the Doorstep. This is an initiative of the U.S. Global Engagement Project of the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. I'll be your co-host for this evening. I am Nicholas Gvozdev.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin. Very excited today to welcome journalist, not-for-profit founder, and author of Mountain Tales, Love and Loss in the Municipality of Castaway Belongings, Saumya Roy. Thank you, Saumya, for joining us all the way from Mumbai. So it is your morning. Thank you. We are so grateful for you to start your day early with us. It's our evening. Welcome to everybody who is joining us. Thank you for joining our book talk tonight here and wherever you are in the world. This book, so powerful. As you can see, I made a lot of notes and I encourage everyone to buy this book. It is a great read for our time coming out of COP26 when everybody is talking about the environment and how we can fix the environment. One of the topics that didn't get much press was waste and waste management. Not that that's all that this book is about. I mean, the book is about, as you pointed out today, wealth gaps, income gaps, health gaps, policy gaps, all as a result of how we are handling our waste, how we are growing cities, and as you often say, putting things in the shadows or having a castaway mountain. So thank you so much for coming and joining us and bringing this issue to light. I'd like for you to start out and share with our audience kind of a little bit about your background and the genesis of the book, because most of our audience won't have read it. Nick and I have diligently read it and I love it and I can't wait to talk about it. But if you could just kind of a little bit about how you came to this book based on your background and kind of your experience reporting this.
Sure. As I studied journalism in the US. Thank you first of all for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be talking to you about my book, my very first book, and really a labor of love, if I may say so. So I studied journalism in the US, worked in India as a journalist for many, many years. And I wrote on everything on like stock markets and different policies and, you know, I'm sure some different kinds of feature stories. And then in 2000, and I wrote a lot about financial inclusion also. And so in 2010, I left and began my own nonprofit working in this space of supporting the livelihoods of micro entrepreneurs, which is basically street vendors, cobblers, people who made lunches, did embroidery. And so we began getting all kinds of different people in our office, and in 2013 we began getting the Wastepickers of Deonar asking for loans, and it was as if they were earning some money, but it was as if poverty was on their person. You know, they had cuts, they had bruises, they had bowed legs, and but when you talk to them, they would describe their business so eloquently. They described this as a place, because I was very curious, like, what is this place, what is this business, what is this life, how are you going to repay us, right? And they actually described it as a place of great opportunity. Like they would say, you know, there's a quote where this older woman who was the first person to have come to us said, "Kachra kadi kami hona," and like, is waste ever going to reduce? We're never going to run out of work. There's always going to be stuff for us to do, and, you know, don't worry about it. And so at first they began bringing photographs on their phone to show me. Then I began following them back, and really it was a mountain, you know, although we would call it a landfill normally, a garbage landfill. Physically it was not a landfill. It was I mean, rising up to like 18-story buildings. So literally all the city's waste mushed together with mud. And so mountains that you physically just saw a little bit of mud, and like everything we had consumed in the city, from grain sacks to foil boxes to like children's shoes, I remember, with like a plastic sunflower on them, to I've seen like canvases painted and I don't know how landed up there, to like clothes and jewelry and any and everything you can imagine was ending up there. So I was immediately fascinated, because it became like a mirror to the city, what we were using and how they were crafting their lives off of it. And so I would follow them for a certain period, for several years, just out of curiosity. But then in 2016, there were really epic fires on the garbage mountains, as landfills are known to be accumulations of methane and stuff like that. And so which is very combustible. And so landfills are known for fires. And so there were these huge fires in 2016, and waste pickers were getting arrested and detained for lighting these fires, which they may have lit. But I also wanted to write, I thought of writing a magazine piece to show our connection with this place, that we made this combustible place. And so I started out thinking it would be a magazine piece, but then the research was just endless and fascinating and ended up in this book.
So to our audience, so we're talking about landfill. So you might think of a landfill here in the US. I know you visited this place because we talked a little bit about it, and it's in the book, Fresh Kills in Staten Island, which used to be the world's largest landfill and is now sprouting grass and trees, and I think was recently supposed to be opened into a park, and it's all so nice, except when you really start thinking about it, and this book really helped me to start thinking about it, the term landfill, well, where does our trash go if it doesn't go? So in New York, I found that, and the average American, so the first statistic is the average American produces 5 pounds of trash a day. 5 pounds of trash a day. So I became mortified by that fact. And then I started to think, where does it go? So I actually have a friend who works in New York City sanitation. And he, told me the similar stories to you, that he finds the strangest things in the trash, but he just picks it up. But where does it go? And then our trash goes as far away as Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio. On what you described had happened over time in history in Mumbai, that the trains would collect the garbage and the trucks would drive to this landfill, creating these towers. And I have to tell you, I don't know where our trash goes after it hits Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, and I'm embarrassed. And I think one of the things that this book does is really ask us, as you say, to think about all that we consume and where does it go. And one of my favorite parts about the book is that you show historically the development of this place, this particular landfill, and connected to Mumbai's history. And I was wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about it, because these things just don't happen from nowhere.
Sure. Funnily, it began with a previous pandemic, which is the plague pandemic of 1896 in Mumbai, and there's sort of pretty strong resonances, because that pandemic was supposed to have come on a trading ship from China riding on a rat, and so Mumbai at the time was also growing very rapidly, and so there was garbage growing with the city, and the rats were supposed to have traveled with the garbage, infecting the plague traveling with the rats. And so as the plague began to grow, the municipality again thought of quarantine to stem the spread of the plague. People were getting sick, people were dying, and so they thought the best way to stem the spread of plague was quarantine. So, soldiers began going into Indian homes, dismantling houses physically, inspecting people for plague buboes, which Indians thought was obviously intrusive, because they didn't have much of a sense of this was an unknown disease, and they were being physically inspected for it, being forcibly taken to hospital, etc. And so there was a lot of unrest in the city. There was migration. There was people moving away to avoid this. Months of grains that were piled up were taken away so that rats didn't infest them and also cause plague. And so eventually there was so much unrest in the city, violence, all of that as a resistance to all of these plague measures, that in the end, the municipality decided, let's just transport the trash away. And so they bought this 823-acre plot at the edge of the island city of Mumbai. At the time, it was outside the city. And It was a marshy swamp by the sea. And they decided to make a train line called the Kachra train, which means literally the garbage train, only to transport the city's garbage to this far edge to stay unseen. And they thought actually at the time that the colonial administration, British administration, that it would just fill up the swamp and it would be a money-making scheme because they would rent it out to farmers and earn some money on this fertile garbage, enriched soil. As it happened, the city grew, and this remained a forgotten corner that just kept growing and growing and growing. And when court cases began in 1996, and the municipality kind of turned back, they found 12 million metric tons of trash lying there, making garbage mountains, vertiginous garbage mountains.
And that's, speaking of the municipality coming in and looking at it in 1996, nothing happened for 2 decades. And one of the things that really struck me in this was the bureaucracy really hindering any sort of fixes. So they brought in a special company, in the 2000s to try to create clean garbage and create safe ways to incinerate it. And that didn't work. And then nothing happened. And then nothing happened. And it kept going back to the courts. And you have great characters trying to fix things. A doctor, an activist, a judge, great characters trying to fix things. And yet nothing happens. And so, in all of this, what do you see, and what does it say about India's system, and how it treats kind of the people that maybe need it the most?
Yeah, you see these cycles of, and many cities struggle with this. New York City famously, there was once a barge stuck outside New York City with garbage on it, and they didn't know where to send it. So it stayed stuck for weeks, floating off of New York City. So many cities struggle with this, but certainly in Mumbai, when my entry point was obviously the waste pickers' lives, but then it was clear that the garbage mountains were imprinted in the waste pickers' lives, that certainly the fact that they were not moving, that there was not a resolution, that they were 122 years old when they were supposed to be closed in 25 years. They had outlasted their life now by a century. And so I began to look at why were these mountains not moving? And I could see that there were attempts being made. So they planned for this big waste to compost plant. It's coming. It doesn't come. Then there are like these fires, and then they plan a huge waste to power plant. It's coming, but nobody bids for it. And now they're planning a smaller waste to power plant, which is supposed to come in 2023. So you could say that, I wouldn't say that there was no intention at any point. There was a court case going on. The court case is now 26 years old. And so I began to go see what was happening in this court case. And every time I became very fascinated. I attended something like 300 hours of court proceedings. And
Wow.
Again, in court, every time it felt like, oh my God, something is happening. This place is going to move. It's going to move. It's going to move. And then it didn't move. So you could just say that this is a pretty intractable problem. Now they say there's something like 16 million metric tons of trash. So it's not easy to move. It could just be that it is a policy. It's a genuine policy problem that cities around the world face. But having said that, it certainly has an impact. It has a human cost. And I would only say that any solution cannot only be a brick and mortar technocratic solution that, hey, let's make a plant, but it must also include who are the people who've taken trash away from here all of these years, and what really can we do for them also?
One of the things in reading the book that I found very interesting, and again, you've already discussed this, right? That the pandemic was the start of it, but of course, that the trash mountains around the world now create their own health issues for the people that live around them. And going back to a point that Tatiana raised, which is this is a reverse doorstep issue in a way. We expect that we put trash out and it gets taken away, and then we don't think about it. And one of the things is almost the intractability of some of this, because we've seen, certainly in the U.S., the push towards recycling. Well, we will recycle more, and then we find out that much of what we think of, much of what we then send to recycling doesn't in fact get recycled. It gets sent to to landfills. There was the free cycle movement for a while, and I was struck by that because of the extent of people who live on these and in these trash mountain communities, essentially saying, well, what can we extract of value from here? And so we had in this country the free cycle movement of, well, don't throw it out, put your a broken table or a chair and someone will come along and fix it and reuse it. But again, we've seen the limits of that. So as you're talking about these solutions, and you said we can't just have the technocratic bricks and mortar imposed, what do some of the people who live in these trash communities, trash mountain communities, what are things they would like to see? How do they, you said at the beginning that for many of them, they see this as a never ending source of livelihood. There's always going to be trash. And so therefore they can always generate a living from it. But what would they see moving forward as a positive solution? Or is it just a sense of, we're here, we'll accept the risks, the health risks and other things, and we just do this because this is what enables us to survive?
So I would say that they don't know any other life. Many of the characters in this book are second and third generation waste pickers. There's not a lot of social mobility from here. So if you were to ask them, they would just say this should continue.
Yeah.
Right. But having said that, I did think very long and deep about it. And I personally am not an apologist for this life. It's a dark life, a perilous life, a precarious life. And I certainly wouldn't wanted these garbage mountains to continue so that these lives or these livelihoods continue. I think, however, that this is skilled work. Segregating, sorting garbage, reselling it. This is pretty skilled work. And even if this place, like it in the US, this is what is called an MRF, a material recovery facility. And so even if a plant were to come, they could continue to have jobs around it. And they could continue to be segregating, sorting, that sort of thing. Like even in the US, there are many cities that still do single stream rather than the segregated stuff. And often it is at the MRF that it is segregated. And I should also say that a lot of waste from the US as well as other developed countries in Europe gets exported to other countries. For a while it was China, but now it's also India and East Asia and different countries like that. So like paper and plastic and those kinds of things do get exported to different countries. So yeah, I mean, for what is to happen to waste pickers, I think that this is skilled work and it can be included in any modern waste management system that any city would have.
Could I just ask, there was an anecdote or some of the things in the book that I just found fascinating, a little bit more about why, which is surprising because you have some people here, right? We have this expression of dumpster diving where people go and they say, you find a Rembrandt in the trash. And yet in this particular community, there's if you find a luxury good, that people reject it, right? That if there's a Louis Vuitton bag or a pair of shoes or expensive electronics that could be fixed, that people reject it. And I found that to be interesting as well, because could you perhaps go in a bit more on those kinds of stories? How do these communities identify what they see as valuable, and why do they reject things that an outside observer might say you can make a lot of money, you can repurpose luxury items and resell them, at low cost. Here in this country, we, consignment shops and secondhand and vintage. But there, in your book, there was this almost rejection of these communities turning away from, dealing with the luxury items. So perhaps for the people again who haven't read the book yet, that I found that to be such an interesting, description.
Sure. If you see that there is a difference between what they're saying and what they're doing in the book as well. So while they say that if you get something expensive, they're just a little bit suspicious, and maybe it's that instinct that it's better to have sold it off rather than to be wearing any gold or silver that they find, because they say that there must be some reason why it came here, which is a very natural thought to have, right? Like it must, how could you have forgotten, say, a pair of gold earrings? It's not something that you would just forget. So maybe it didn't bring good luck to the person who had it originally, which is why it ended up here. And so it's better that we sell it than that we wear it. It's also probably a means of livelihood. So maybe that's also the rationale to it is also that it's better that we sell it than that we wear it. That being said, anything other than luxury goods, they pretty much wore it, used it, ate it. Their lives, their houses are made of it. They wore the clothes that they found. They gifted pencil boxes that they found. They ate ready-to-eat mixes that came on dumping ground right after expiry. They ate fruit and vegetables that came there. So sometimes it's also, there's a difference between what they say and what they do.
They do. Yeah.
Ideally, yes, you want to buy your own gold, but if you can't and you find it there, well, why not?
Why not?
You mentioned the vegetables. I have to say this sentence because I circled so many sentences in this book, but this was one that this is one of your main character, if not the main character. And maybe you could talk about, if I say her name correctly, I hope, Farzana.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. A main character in your book, and I won't give anything away because her story is surprising, shocking, and whoa, that's all I have to say. But that's for the audience to buy the book and you'll find out what happens to Farzana. But one of the things she said was Farzana had heard that not everyone ate vegetables grown in trash. And that sentence just, I don't know, was so powerful. And then the statistic here is that 28% of our trash is food waste. And thinking, what can we do about food waste here in New York? New York is now trying to develop a compost program, and we're trying, but that idea that here's this good food, and you mentioned the packets or that were expired. Here she's eating vegetables that grow, pumpkins that grow in the trash, and and I think that we don't really even realize that there are how much food is wasted. Our default is you're throwing away electronics or something that's broken, but it's actual food. I mean, that's over a quarter of our waste here in the US, and I imagine it's the same around the world. And I think that was one of the shocking things when you're thinking about waste pickers. But you use the term waste picker. I also want to say it got me to thinking that, and you're talking about people who sort stuff. Every day in New York, I see people looking through the plastic bottles. And plastic was one of the key things before it became too cheap, right? Plastic was what everybody wanted in the trash pile. It's the same thing here. It's like literally like plastic bottles. And I just thought, well, wow, it is not a problem, like you said, of developed world versus developing. It is a problem everywhere. And I think that that is one of the brilliant things that this book does, is make us think about the way that we use trash or not use trash or think about trash. And that it's not, and it shouldn't be, I think, this bad thing. I don't know, it has this bad connotation, which, and so I'm wondering, does it have that same bad connotation in India? Because your book was so fair. It was so fair and objectively reported. I didn't ever know, like, aside from that conference where you were talking about how the burning piles spread the smelly air into Mumbai and then started to notice the hill, aside from that one moment, I really did the sense that people thought of it negatively or thought of it at all. What is that true?
Yeah, you're right. I think I would say that these places like this, they grow in invisibility. It is an issue of class as well, right? Once we put it into our waste boxes, we don't want to think what happened. Then from our table, suddenly it becomes waste and it has that negative connotation. And we don't want to think what really happens to it, where it lands up, what really happens, whereas it doesn't really go anywhere. It is there and it does need to be dealt with all the same, which is one of the things that my book talks about. And also, it's a sign of wealth and development of a country, that what really comes in waste. And so food, in India, food forms a very large part of waste. And as countries get wealthier, we see more plastic, more packaging, more cardboard, more thermocol, less biodegradable stuff coming in trash. And the less wealthy we are, then you see just fruit peels and stuff like that. So at that, and you see on the waste mountains, this is happening. There is more plastic coming, more cardboard coming, and less of, food still is a very large part. I would say almost half of what we get is food there. And so this, you can imagine, it's like this mushy pile of everything mixed up, falling out of dump trucks on the garbage mountain. And with the rains falling on that waste, sometimes those seeds sprout, and you have plants, and you have vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things growing there. And just in that paragraph that you talked about, there were also some like poisonous plants growing. There were some that they thought were healing plants. If you had a cut and you rub the leaf on, it could get healed, or you could just eat a leaf and you could stay intoxicated for hours together. And so people were a little careful sometimes of eating them. But then if you found a big pumpkin somewhere mushed in trash, you would pick up the pumpkin and cook it also. And this is all the stuff that was coming out of our dump trucks, growing there and sustaining some kind of a life there.
Yeah, I think that the idea that there was a life and people raised children, sent them to school, had dreams of getting out of this system, was really powerful, just to show that community. And I think that's one of the things that you showed. And I'm wondering how you felt about the community. How were you a part of it? Because your entry in it was to give loans, but eventually you decided that this wasn't a good place to give loans because they weren't getting repaid, and you started moving your loans out to rural areas more, right? It said that in the book.
Yeah, that's right.
But you still stayed involved with the community. So how, and are you still involved in the community?
I am. I mean, I'm just done with the book. So yeah, I at first they repaid perfectly, which is also what got me very curious about this place. We literally never had a single missed installment there for years together, because not many people were lending there. They knew they were not very attractive as borrowers to traditional lenders in the city. And so they just made sure that they were repaying us very perfectly. Yeah, they were at first they were repaying us very perfectly, but then when I began writing in 2016, when I began thinking of writing this book, I made it clear to all the characters that this was not about money. This was just about sharing their stories, etc. So that was one of several reasons that we began tapering off loans here in Mumbai city. As you know, I talk about demonetization that happened, etc. So we slowly tapered off our lending in those lanes, but also in Mumbai city, and we continue to work in rural areas. So through the reporting of the book, I made sure that we did not also have a lending relationship with them. And I will say, now that the reporting is done and the book is out, I've always had a wonderful relationship, but it's nicer when you don't have to keep going back and asking pesky questions and saying, did you really say this? And did you really say that? And you're just hanging out without any real, but talking of the dump trucks and the food that spilled out, I did pick a small passage, just a small paragraph to read on that I thought you might.
Yes, please do. And then we open it up to questions from the audience. So after your reading, hopefully we'll get some questions in too.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, this is about the garbage dumping ground, which is about 300 acres large, rises to garbage mountains that are up to like 120 feet high. And the main person, the protagonist in the book, is Farzana Ali Sheikh, who is a garbage picker. And this is about her. It was June 2008, and the school year had just begun, along with Mumbai's months-long rainy season. But Farzana had come to work on the mountains all day. Most mornings when she arrived at the trash peaks, she started by collecting the overripe tomatoes and eggplants that arrived with the discarded food or sprouted from it with the rains. She waited for her friends' hazy figures to emerge on the rugged slopes and threw her pickings at them, making dark, wet splotches on their clothes. They swiveled in pain and confusion. When they spotted Farzana, her friends scrambled to look, for their own tomatoes. They scoured through the trash that arrived overnight for bits of watermelons, tomatoes, or eggs and hurled them back at her. Giggly tomato fights ensued as they chased each other around the unsteady, sun-filled slopes, rotting fruit in hand. Laughter and light reflected in the halo of the forgotten mountains.
Just a great paragraph to read because it really shows the humanity of a place that you do say is forgotten, but that is just so full of life and living ideas, and dreams, and hopes. And so I invite our audience to put your questions in the chat, and I will monitor the chat as we continue our conversation, and I'll read out the questions. So please feel free to ask questions about Mountain Tales, the reporting process, or anything about the book, or if you have comments about waste or waste management, if you've seen any of these trash piles. I want to, as we're waiting for questions to come in the chat, I want to add and take this in a little bit of a different direction, which is politics. You have a couple of pages on it, not that much, but you do talk a lot about policy kind of as an undertone, but you talk how politicians came into the area, and in particular in reference to hiring people to come to the rallies, which I thought was fascinating, that people who needed money would, themselves out to go to rallies with politicians, and then how politicians would go into the areas. But it was really telling, and for people who don't or aren't as familiar with the politics and the class system in India, could you comment on why it seems that a lot of the pickers are Muslim, if I'm understanding correct, and why a certain party dominates in that area? What is it about the politics of the situation that we should understand?
I just want to very quickly say that if you are in the US, the book is called Castaway Mountain. The copy that you had is called Mountain Tales if you live in India. And if you live in the US, it's called Castaway Mountain. And this is what the cover looks like. Talking of the politics, this was since the 1960s, at first, all the waste of the city was sent to pile up there. And then from the 1960s onwards, when all the people who had migrants who had come to live on the city's pavements, train tracks, railway tracks, were seen as extraneous, seen as something of an eyesore in the city, were also sent to live there. And so migrants were people obviously from the bottom rungs of Indian society, belonging to certain castes, certain religions. But it was a mixed area, but more Muslims than Hindus. And then you may have heard of the 1992 riots across the country, really, after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And so there were pretty violent riots in this area because it was known to house a lot of Muslims. There was some atrocities against the police, then some violence between communities, between the police and the different communities, etc. At the end of which the city got segregated, and this place became a largely Muslim area because those who could leave left. Those who did have social mobility, those who could afford to move out, moved out. And now I would say about 85 to 90% of the people living here are Muslims. And so there is a particular party that I talk about called the Samajwadi Party, and all the representatives really are from there. The councillors and the MLA, the MP, all of congressmen, as we call it in the US, they are from the Samajwadi Party, which is seen as a Muslim party. They're not the party in power or ever have been in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, or in India. And so you think that with representation, they can bring their issues to light, but actually it's only an extension of their marginalization, because even the party that represents them is not a mainstream party in the city, in the state, or the country. So it's only almost just a symbol of their marginalization. And I should also add that while researching for this, sometimes I would see YouTube videos. I didn't interact a lot with the politicians, but when I would see YouTube videos of them saying, oh, we've brought water supply all over this place and there's electricity all over. But every time I walk in the lanes, you see that there are all these very beautiful scenes of 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds still buying water, still bringing it back up. But if you were to see any of their public statements, they'll tell you there's water in everybody's house. So sometimes that representation, even in a democracy or an election-based system, doesn't work so well.
Mm. And I see some questions coming in, but I'll ask just as a follow-up. You said that in 2023, there's supposed to be something, and I think Modi has said, oh, we're going to change everything, and in this broad sweeping political statement. Do you have faith that that's going to happen, or do you see more movement, or did COVID kind of slow everything down?
Oh, well, this is almost a post-pandemic announcement, actually, because in this year's budget, in the end of February, they announced almost $40 billion to remediate garbage mountains. He literally, and then the Prime Minister launched it formally just last month, this plan to remediate mountains of garbage, as he called it, also. And so I am hopeful, because the first phase of this particular program, Swachh Bharat or Clean India, they did end up making a lot of toilets. I do travel to rural India, and I often see that toilets have been constructed all over through the first phase of that program. So I am very hopeful that something will come through, and that will account. He said that this will help to make green jobs. It will help to create jobs for migrants. So I am very hopeful that something will happen on that front, not only in Mumbai, but where garbage mountains are. Any city you see in India, like Delhi, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, I know that researchers are working on this, and they have documented that there are waste picking communities who also, by the way, are from the most marginalized communities of India, belonging to those castes, and often Muslims, who work as waste pickers. And so I feel that the work of remediating pollution and the work of remediating poverty and marginalization are going hand in hand, and they should go hand in hand. And as you know, like we just had the Glasgow Climate Conference, where also people talked about reducing the usage of coal, or reducing the emissions of methane or carbon dioxide, which again suggests, oh, you move to clean energy, or you think of it as a technological solution. But also there are coal workers and waste workers who work on landfills, and I think that those goals need to go together in Mumbai, in India, but also all over the world.
Speaking of methane, we have a question coming in from Martha Chen. There is a major risk that the focus on methane gas after COP26 will be a move to destroy dump sites. What would you recommend? And then sort of connected, not really, is Marty asks, also, do you know about, or have you been in touch with the Global Alliance of Wastepickers?
Yeah, I have heard about the Global Alliance of Wastepickers. I'm not sure I've interacted with them, except that I know in Pune there is an organization called KKKP, which is affiliated with this Global Alliance of Wastepickers, and I have seen their work very closely and admired it tremendously. They are like a cooperative of waste pickers, and really working to improve the lives of waste pickers. Even it's just wonderful to see the women who work on that, like they are given a small amount of insurance. We as users pay for them to pick up our waste every day, to segregate it, and they move around lanes of Pune with their hand carts, and they're given gloves, they're given insurance, and so their work is really amazing, and I know they're associated with this Global Alliance. On the question of methane, I think it is exactly what we spoke about earlier, which is, yes, I agree, of course, methane is concentrated in landfills. And so I do agree that just closing a landfill to control methane is one goal, but I think that goal needs to go with the human goal of what is to happen to these waste pickers. You cannot just close these places down without thinking of what the human cost of this is going to be, because historically the only thing that left these places left in the hands of waste pickers. It did not leave in the hands of, say, the municipality or something. So actually they have done the job of reducing waste. I think there's some studies to show in India that about 30% of waste is taken away by waste pickers, which reduces reduces the cost even and the hassle of managing that waste or making that power plant or compost plant, etc. And so it is imperative to include them, to rehabilitate their lives, to provide them with new lives and livelihoods. I completely agree with her that you cannot just shut down a landfill without thinking of the people who lived off of it for so many years.
Yeah. And I think, part and parcel is looking at health, right? If we're going to talk about methane and emissions and all the bad stuff that's coming out, and you see that in your book throughout, particularly with tuberculosis, which I don't know, sounds like it should not exist anymore. And the amount, and I had to keep pinching myself and remind myself that you're writing this in present day. I mean, this is not 30 years ago. Like, your characters are living today with TB, like are living today with poor medical treatment, are going to the hospital and getting shunted around, or not able to get to the hospital because it's too far away and they can't get there. And so, one of the things you mentioned is that health gap. And I'm wondering what sort of discussion, if there even is any, about kind of closing that health gap. I mean, we have a terrible solution in the US, like we don't have one. So, if, I don't know if India is any better, if it's being talked about, especially considering all of the issues that you raised in the book with health.
I think they could. Other policies, yes, government hospitals are free. There's a large government hospital that I talk about repeatedly in the book that I often accompanied Wastepickers to, where they can go and can. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you for your comments. I have followed Dr. Chen's work on the issue of Wastepickers for so many years and admired it, and I'm so very thankful that she's here today. And I look forward to speaking to her on this issue. So that this hospital is there, people can get free treatment there. This is there's a special TB a project that runs out of this hospital, and I interacted very closely with the doctors who work in that unit, and just greatly admire the work that they do on tuberculosis. This is a global hotspot for multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis. So tuberculosis is not necessarily related to landfills per se, but just being in very close contact, because it spreads through air and there's lots of people living in a small enclosed house. So if one person has it, they can transfer it on to other people very easily. And so that there's not a very clear direct connection with landfill or waste and tuberculosis, but there is a connection with poverty and tuberculosis. So these are all very interconnected kind of issues. But yes, lots of surveys have found they all suffer from when I, as you know, I talk about how life expectancy there was 39 years. And so I tried to sort of unpack that a little bit. And I found that even until 2017, life expectancy there had not risen by much. Although it only was in an age range. I didn't get an exact number, but it had not gone up by much. So what was causing those early deaths? It was very much asthma, respiratory diseases, upper respiratory diseases, stuff like that, which are clearly related to pollution, related to the fires on the landfills, related to inhaling a lot of the poisonous or chemical gases that are emitted by such untreated landfills. And so that is certainly having an impact on their health. When I looked at court documents over the years, doctors had submitted papers showing that there were collapsed lungs, COPD, the interstitial lung diseases, which cause hardening between the lungs. And these are both sort of fatal diseases, really shrink the quality of your life and shortens your life. So these are many illnesses related to living in the landfill, living in poverty, all of which come together. There is a high rate of infant mortality, teenage mothers. So children are already born with a nutritional gap. So all of those exist. Are there health facilities? Yes, there are. And by the same token, did I see a lot of ill health? I did. As you know, 3 of the characters passed away during the writing of this book, including a teenage girl. Salma Sheikh, who I write about extensively in the book, passed away right after I reported the book. Farzana continues to suffer from tuberculosis. So I do see ill health there. I can't deny that. Most characters in the book did suffer from tuberculosis at some point or the other.
And it's also a very traditional society. I guess I'm going to say that I didn't expect that either. I don't know why, this idea that, yes, okay, you have a, life expectancy that's 39. So by 18, if you're not married, that's it, your life is over. By 19, you are an old maid. And I couldn't comprehend that. And I'm wondering, how you, report that and kind of, I don't know, you did it in such an objective way. So how did you not include any of your biases in the book, or did you find it hard?
I suppose some of those biases are there, because I say this in the book somewhere that my own, in the introduction where I am there in first person, I do say that my own relationships, my own attachments, they do form a part of this, of the narration of this. Like, for example, when Muharram Ali abandons his children and goes away, I certainly felt for those children. I feel they need a book of their own. His daughter being 8 and stuttering and stammering because the father's left and gone away. I wouldn't say that my biases are not there. I feel that my attachment was very much there. Having said that, I think as writers, it's good to just acknowledge that for the reader to know. It's possible that somewhere my biases have crept into this. Having said that, is it a traditional society? Yes. They do marry early, have children early. Farzana, for example, is now 23 and has 3 children.
She had another child. That was after the book.
Yeah. Just 2 weeks ago, she had a child, her 3rd child. Although she suffers from anemia and tuberculosis and stuff like that, she now has 3 children. I feel that it's not my place to judge them, because I did see I would say it's the dance of life. You see her also pushing against these boundaries. Like when her brother tells her not to go there, she's there the next day. If she's told not to do something, she will do it, right? Like her family didn't always want her to marry Nadeem. And yet when they said no, it was almost like she had to do it. So yes, you see tradition, but then you also see them fighting against tradition at different points of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting how they went to get the blessings, from the healers, and it was almost like going to a revival meeting here in the U.S. And then they're like, "Yeah, no, that's not going to work. Forget it." So, and it was this kind of this balance between the old and the new. And I have 2 questions. We have a mention of a film, but not the name of the film. So maybe Luann, if you remember the name of the film, we can maybe ask Saumya what she thinks. But I wanted to ask.
Can we go to Frederico's question?
Oh, there's another one?
Yes, yeah. Federico asks about the global trend of dump site closures and the lack of alternatives. What happens to the workers? And again, you alluded to that earlier about, we have material sorting sites and the like, but if we say we're going to close this down, what happens to the people? Is there and just based on his question there of given the global trend of dump site closures and the lack of alternatives for waste pickers who depend on their work in these dump sites, right? We often hear that here when people say, well, we lose an industry, you'll just do something else, except, it's easier to say on paper than it is. And Luann says she thinks it's called, the film is called Garbage Pickers, that was on the festival circuit several years ago. And whether or not, if you thought it was a good if you've seen it, if you thought it was a good representation of of what you wrote about in the book.
I have not seen it, but I have heard of several such films that were made on landfills, one on and several books. Did I hear about a book? No. I have heard about movies though. One about Brazil. I think it was called City of Angels, because the landfill site there is called something like the City of Angels. I have heard about a movie made about imported waste in China, and a child growing up there. I think that was quite popular. So I have heard about those movies. I'm not sure about the one exactly that you're talking about. On the issue of landfills and what is to happen to waste pickers, I think that question has to be integrated with the question of what happens to landfills. I don't think that it's a fair idea to just shut them down without thinking of what happens to these people. Yeah, it may have been Brazil, right. So I think it's based on the landfill of, I think it was Sao Paulo or Rio, and it's called The City of Angels, and I have heard that it's a fantastic movie. Yeah, I don't think that you can just close them down without thinking of what really these people, what can be. So in India, for example, there are rules since 2016 that say that waste pickers must be included in the waste management systems of the city. But actually the rules and real life are going in like two different worlds, wherein they're still thinking of what is a technocratic solution. So even for the plant that is supposed to come up now, they say that nobody lives here, no relief is required to be given to anybody because nobody lives here, right? But these are people who've made their living off of this place for so many years. They have been doing the most hazardous, perilous, precarious work, putting their lives on the line to shrink these garbage mountains that we create, that we sent out, that we don't want to see. And so I think how their skills can be used, how they can be integrated into waste management systems is something that is really important and a crucial part of how you remediate landfills.
Yeah, I think we saw some of it when some people were trying to get municipal ID cards and try to become garbage truck drivers, and then you saw other people, like I said, trying to get cash become as like players in a protest or or a rally. And but what I wanted to ask about, because I think I don't know, are you working on your next book, or maybe is this it? When and I forget the character's name, but she's going for medical trials, and you say Western companies come to places like India to use human subjects because you can't do that here, but they test their drugs on human subjects, and they pay them money, and they use that money to repay bills or to help their children. And it was something I had never thought about. And it was shocking to me, and sad, and especially because I don't know if that was the result of her anemia and then poor health as a result of all the drugs that she had taken and all the trials she had been a part of. I don't know if you felt it was, but did you look more into that? Or you included a little bit about it as part of the side hustle, but is that something you're looking more into, or what is your next book?
Yeah, no, that family actually fascinated me tremendously, just because at one point it seemed that the father, Muharram Ali, would do very well. He was very charismatic. He was constantly taking loans, doing lots of different businesses. It seemed like he would do very well. But then he just, as the poor often do, and possibly the rich often do, got into a debt trap, tremendous debt trap. With every loan he took, he actually had more spending plans than he had, repayment plans, and he ended up really collapsing, leaving his family in a very precarious, I think it's 5 children in a very precarious situation. And the mother then, as you often see in families like this, women really taking that role of stepping in this crisis situation and trying to provide her children that very doing literally putting her body, her life online to provide her children some kind of, she really wants her children to study, to provide them an education. She's constantly trying to send them back to school, although they've dropped out. And so for that, to give them a life, to give them a safe life, a safe, secure, a secure life, give them a schooling, she becomes a subject for medical trials. And she continues even today to be a subject for medical trials. She does suffer from ill health even, and that somewhere has taken a toll on her. One day I write in this that she fell on a train station, getting off a train, and broke her front teeth. So she's a little bit toothless. She's had tuberculosis. Is it related to the medical trials? I'm not entirely sure, and I'm that I can connect those dots there. But yes, she does. The two are both correct, that she does go for medical trials and she does suffer from ill health. And she continues to go because she wants it's the only way that she can make money. She is constantly repaying lenders, like money lenders, whom she doesn't know at what rate she's repaying their interest. She continues to repay. I'm not sure she's ever reached even the principal. It's just the interest amount that she's repaying.
Yeah.
At the same time, in order to have some quality of life, she needs to be earning. So she always tells me, I don't need a small amount of money. I need a lot of money. And the only way to earn a lot of money is to do something really dire, like medical trials.
Yeah, that was shocking to me. Yeah.
No. Listening to all of this, and as this conversation is moving forward, I'm struck by something we've been doing, and we've been charting at Carnegie Council through the doorstep, is that, the ethos of the 2020s is very much governments around the world are charged with improving living conditions, whether it's China to the United States, different forms of government. It's all about getting more people into the middle class. The middle class is defined by consumption. You are defined by middle class by what you consume. And so what does that mean for the pickers? Is this sustainable? And do the pickers look, as more of this trash comes in, and as they see more people are enjoying a lifestyle, is there going to be, is there a potential for social unrest down the line? Is there a point where, for the city, right, the people who live in the city who say we want a middle class lifestyle, but now this waste mountain is impinging on our quality of life because of air and smell and other things? How sustainable, you talk about, you give us the origin, right? This was to get trash out of a city, to deal with the plague. And it has worked seemingly for the last 100+ years. But are we reaching a point where, in Mumbai specifically, but around the world, that this approach to waste management, combined with people wanting a more consumptive lifestyle, that we're going to reach, points where we're not going to be able to square this circle anymore?
Yeah. So this is a question that I explore as much as I possibly can through this book. I don't have a sort of very perfect answer for you, but I do feel that for me, these garbage mountains were a symbol of inequality. Like the people who make them, we're making these mountains, and these are people living, waste pickers are people living off these mountains. So it almost became a physical manifestation of the growing inequality. And as you know, India is one of the more unequal societies in the world, but certainly this is not only in India, but in many different countries. Okay, is there a particular system that perpetuates a certain lifestyle that encourages consumption, that encourages a life also then of waste? Yes, there is, and that is something that really needs to be rethought. Like, for example, gadgets. You're encouraged to keep buying them rather than to keep repairing them, reservicing them, or refurbishing them. And they're often landing up here. Like, India is the world's second largest cell phone market. And so cell phones are often getting thrown out because companies are not allowing you to replace, say, batteries or different things like that. But as you know, Apple made a large settlement on this count recently. And so often it's difficult to repair, to service parts. And so within months, and we also, of course, but thanks to advertising, thanks to demand that's being created, we want the new shiny new thing. We are encouraged to want the shiny new thing, and so we're throwing away phones or whatever else it might be. I'm just using that as an example, but it could also be a television. It could also be lots of televisions come to the landfill that I've seen there. It could be plastic bottles of water. So all of this is landing up there a lot, that we are encouraged to consume, that society, companies, advertising are encouraging us to consume more, buy more, waste more, rather than to reuse, repair. That our society encourages us to do that, and that is causing landfill waste to grow. Is that causing inequality? Yes, of course it is.
Yeah, so I think that this book, Castaway Mountain, here in the US, I think I have another version because I was so excited to get it, but I got an early version. But Castaway Mountain is the name of the book, and Saumya Roy is the author. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a beautiful book. We have a lot of thank yous coming in the chat, and a lot of stories stories that I think that need to be told. And I think, for me, this is one of the important ones of our time, related to climate, related to a topic that we don't often talk about, but looking at how we can solve issues of our day, from income inequality, from medical inequality, all related to how we consume, not consume, and the people that are in the rungs that are taking our trash. And I just think that that is so important. I know I'm showing you the other book, but this is also such a nice cover. That thank you so much for your time, Saumya. This is such a pleasure. We really appreciate it. And happy morning to you in Mumbai.
Thank you for having me.